Hi everyone, I'm going to be taking you all the way from the very beginner level of Python all the way up to more advanced GCSE content. So by watching these videos, hopefully by the end of it, you can feel free to work your way all the way up from grade 1 all the way to grade 8, grade 9. Now I'm going to be following the Pearson curriculum. However, if your primary language that you're learning for your GCSE course is Python, all of this will still be relevant. So what I've got open here is called an IDE. So you'll see in front of you some keywords, and I'll talk about those a little bit more in a moment. So IDE actually stands for Integrated Development Environment. And the name of the IDE that I'm using is called MU, which is free to download. There are loads of other ones. There are some online examples, such as Trinket or Online GDB or Replit, and there's loads and loads which are recommended. So what you've got here is called a code editor. So this space here is where programmers would practice their code and try and create a program that would eventually either be used to make maybe a website or a program or an app, or potentially go towards making a game. And sometimes it could be multiple different IDEs which are used together. Now what you might notice with these words here is they've all got a hash symbol at the beginning of them, and that means that they're a comment. And comments are usually written for something of interest to the programmer, but it won't actually affect the code. So even if I were to run this program, nothing would happen because there's a hash symbol in front of all of these sentences. So we've already discussed what an IDE is. It's basically a compiler, or in some aspects, an interpreter. So if you think about what an interpreter does, for a language, they're going to try and interpret and make sense of something to somebody else. So if you can speak French and somebody can't, you can interpret what that person's speaking to somebody else. Therefore, you're interpreting it. So what the IDE does is it interprets Python, which is called a high-level language, into machine code, which is what the computer can understand. So when we run or execute our program, if I just press run now, it will open up a little dialog box or a little file location. And I can just give it a name. So I'm going to call it test. I'm going to call it video 2. Let's call it video 1 and overwrite that one. Now you'll notice here I've actually got a file name and it's saved as a Python file. So when I press save now, it will just overwrite what I've got there automatically. Another reason why an IDE is a really good way of practicing your programming is because it has a debugger tool. And you're going to learn much more about debugging and fixing certain errors, but it's one thing that can help you and kind of make it easier for you along the way. IDEs, just like computers, like things to be in order. So they follow sequence of events. So the word sequence literally means one thing happens after the other. So you'll probably have your breakfast, then go do something else, then eat your lunch, then do something else, and then eat dinner. You'll eat them in that sequence. You'll eat one after the other, hopefully not all at once, but that's what a sequence is. So it just means one thing after another. So an IDE will read from top to bottom, and on the left here you can see you've got numbers, and that refers to a line of code. So if somebody says, oh, there's an error in, for example, line 10, then you can actually quickly look for that error and you can spot it, which is another reason why an IDE is really useful. And then lastly, these are really important. So you'll notice in a minute something called syntax coloring and highlighting, which you can identify things for you and make sure you're sticking to the rules of the language which you're learning or you're programming. And it can also provide something called automatic indentation. So it kind of helps you along the way quicker and makes you get your job done easier, basically. So I'm going to start off with the most basic thing. It's called, and this here is called a function. And the reason it's called a function is because it's going to help us do something in a minute. Now notice what I said about the coloring. Where it says print, it's now in blue, it's not in black. So if I were to write that differently, if I wrote it with a capital T on the end, it's in black because it's just normal text. But if I have it all in lowercase, Python, the language, knows what this means. It means something. And what it means is it means to output into the console, which I'll do for you now. So our syntax is where we have to follow certain rules, and I'll talk more about that in the next video. But I'm going to open a bracket, put quotation marks, and just type hello world. And then I'm going to close with quotation marks and close brackets. Now I said about syntax highlighting, notice here I've now got the brackets actually highlighted here. And that's because essentially it's telling me that they're relevant to each other in some way. I've got both of them there, so they'll work together. And those brackets, whenever you see brackets, it means it's a function within Python. So now I'm just going to run it quickly, and you'll see that it will just automatically output into the console. Output means it's putting something out into the console. I haven't typed anything into the program. I've typed in the code editor, but I've not input into the actual program. But the program has output because of the word print. So if I just do one more really quickly, if this time I put a capital P and then I just put, I don't know, hello, and I run it now, notice I don't have any syntax coloring. I'm going to run it again. And now it's going to give me an error, which again will be covered in more videos. So line 11, this is actually helping me identify there is a problem with my program, there's a problem with my code, it's not working. So as a bit of a challenge, just after watching this first video, in your own preferred IDE, practice writing some print statements, just make a really short story, it doesn't need to be long, and that'll be your task for this video.